Good day. As those of you who follow my channel are aware, the last couple of days have seen a significant escalation in the war of words between the United States and China over Taiwan, and in the mutual deployments of military personnel and aircraft and warships around Taiwan, as the United States and China seem to be preparing for a situation which some people in China are now talking about as an all-out war over Taiwan. This tense situation was aggravated by what I consider to have been an catastrophically misjudged statement published by the US State Department on Sunday, which appeared to cast doubt on the one China policy pursued by the United States since the 1970s, which has explicitly recognized the unity and indivisibility of China, with the government in Beijing as the legitimate government of China, and with Taiwan a part of China and a section of China that forms part of China's territorial integrity. The statement on Sunday appeared to cast doubt on that. It spoke of Taiwan as an ally of the United States. It spoke of democratic Taiwan, giving an implication that Taiwan has a legitimate alternative political system, one superior to that of China itself. And it also alleged or claimed that Chinese military moves around Taiwan were provocative in a way that also appeared to cast doubt on China's sovereignty over the island. And the response from China, as I discussed in my last video, was a succession of extremely strong statements, one by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, another in the form of an editorial by Global Times, as well as more deployments of Chinese military aircraft in ever greater numbers in and around Taiwan, in a way that was clearly intended to respond to the US statement made on Sunday. Well, someone in the United States appears to be becoming increasingly alarmed by the situation, because we learned a few hours ago that a decision had been made to dispatch President Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, to Switzerland, where he will have meetings with Yang Jiechi, his Chinese opposite number. And the statement from the White House reads as follows. This week, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan will travel to Zurich, Switzerland, Brussels, Belgium, and Paris, France. In Zurich, Mr. Sullivan will meet with Chinese Communist Party Politburo member and director of the Office of the Foreign Affairs Commission, Yang Jiechi. They will follow up on President Biden's September 9th call with President Tsai, as we continue to seek to responsibly manage the competition between the United States and the People's Republic of China. Now, there are other aspects to Sullivan's visit. Clearly, Sullivan will be clearly visiting NATO and meeting with various European leaders as well. I suspect that part of the meeting was organized some time ago. But the meeting with Yang Jiechi in Switzerland appears to have been arranged in a hurry, almost certainly in response to the events of the last few days, even though proprieties dictate that it is connected to the meeting which took place, or rather the telephone conversation which took place 2 weeks ago between President Xi of China and President Biden of the United States. Now, the Chinese have provided a commentary about this meeting, and it appears in Global Times, and it reads as follows. Yang Sullivan meeting expected to see how to get China-US relations right. Notice that's a very ambiguous and conditional headline. It doesn't say that it's going to lead to an improvement in relations. It suggests that the Chinese are hoping that the United States might start to adjust relations to China and put them on a more even keel, but it is far from confident that that will happen. And the article then goes on to read as follows. Half a month after a telephone conversation between Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden, Huawei's CFO Meng Wanzhou returned home safely, breaking the ice of the decade-low China-US relations, as the world has widely anticipated or even highly expected. Following this symbolic turning point, China and US militaries resumed high-level talks for the first time since Biden took office in January, and US Trade Representative Catherine Tsai released a positive signal with a frank conversation with China on different areas. I'm going to return to what Catherine Tsai said later in this program. On Wednesday, I should say that would have been Tuesday, late Tuesday night in the United States, but it's Wednesday in China. On Wednesday, China and the United States announced a high-level meeting between top Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi and US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan in Zurich, Switzerland, upholding a pledge made by the two countries to boost communication. So up to this point, the Chinese are putting a positive spin on things. In this article, they are interpreting recent events, in a positive way. They're saying that the United States has resumed contacts with the Chinese military. They're not disclosing the fact that those that meeting with the Chinese military didn't go terribly well. They're saying that the US has agreed to the release of Meng Wanzhou, and indeed she has been released and is back in China. And they're saying that there will be new trade talks between China and the United States. However, as we will come later in this program to see, the United States hasn't so far signalled any willingness to make concessions in these trade talks. However, it seems that hope springs eternal, and at least the Chinese are trying to give a positive spin on the Yang Sullivan meeting in advance of it taking place in Zurich. Anyway, to continue, experts on foreign affairs reached by Global Times on Wednesday believe that nearly 10 months after Biden took office, it appears that the US is planning to put an end to its reckless and unrealistic strategy of dealing with China from a position of strength, and Chinese-US relations are about to enter a pragmatic strategic stalemate stage with concrete cooperation. Notice that it is not going to be friendship. It is the best that might be achieved is some kind of stalemate. In other words, the geopolitical ceasefire, which I have been talking about for some time. That seems to be the Chinese objective rather than a genuine full-scale reconciliation with the United States. Anyway, to continue. They noted, these are the unnamed experts that Global Times has consulted, that the running-in period would not be very smooth, as the Biden administration has shown an uncomfortable and unwise adjustment in the past 8 months. But as what Chinese President Xi has stressed in the phone call, getting the China-US relations right is not an option, but something we must do and must do well. And the world is expecting to see how the meeting between Yang and Sullivan would get the relationship right. It will be the first face-to-face meeting between Yang and Sullivan since their exchanges in Alaska in March with tough and direct words. But observers believe that moment will not be repeated this time. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hua Chunying announced on Wednesday that Yang Jiechi, a member of the political bureau of the Communist Party of China Central Committee and director of the Office of the Central Commission for Foreign Affairs, will meet with Sullivan in Zurich, according to the consensus reached by the Chinese and US heads of state. They will exchange views on China-US relations and relevant issues. The White House said in a statement that the meeting follows up on Biden's September 9th call with President Tsai. It manifested again that, just as President Tsai stressed in the phone call, getting the China-US relationship right is not optional, but something we must do, and must do well. The meeting between Yang and Sullivan will focus on engaging in cooperation, managing differences, and conducting in-depth communication on major issues related to bilateral relations and global affairs. Diao Daming, an expert on US studies and associate professor at the Zhenmin University of China in Beijing, told Global Times. It manifested again that China has been holding a positive and responsible attitude towards China-US relations and always attaches great importance to stabilizing the bilateral ties through dialogue. Diao predicted that the possibility of the two senior officials talking about a summit meeting between Xi and Biden cannot be ruled out, given that the recent bilateral interactions since Biden took office in January have shown little progress. Anyway, coming at a very sensitive juncture, the two senior officials meeting shows the two countries are willing to engage in a frank discussion. Frank, as I said, can mean many things. It can suggest a rather angry discussion to ensure general stability based on effective management on major differences. It will also be beneficial to the Asia-Pacific region. Li Haidong, a professor at the Institute of International Relations of the China Foreign Affairs University, told Global Times. The recent US strategic offensive against China shows the Biden administration is planning to partially cease fire. Remember, I've been talking for some months about the need for a ceasefire. The Chinese are now adopting that phrase. Aside from issues concerning China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, there is a clear reference to Taiwan, there are clear signs in the easing of China-US tensions. From half a year of fierce clashes between China and the US, Biden has played all the trump cards, but only to find it is in urgent need of China's support in dealing with regional security issues. So we will see. That is what the Chinese are saying. They are looking forward to talks between Sullivan and Yang, in which there will be no fundamental concessions by either side towards the other, but that there will be a ceasefire, a stalemate of sorts, a situation where the United States and China pull back from extreme positions, and that means specifically with respect to Taiwan, the United States reaffirming its commitment to the One China policy, no longer supporting Taiwanese moves towards secession, perhaps ending arms sales to Taiwan, and China reciprocating by scaling down its military activities in and around Taiwan. That seems to be the overall objective that the Chinese are aiming for. In other words, a ceasefire, a stalemate, certainly no return to any talk of friendship with the United States, but a calming of the tensions in the South China Sea, on the Taiwan Straits, and on matters surrounding those two topics. And it may be that what has encouraged the Chinese to think that this meeting between Sullivan and Yang might actually achieve some progress is obviously the fact that the United States has agreed to it and has perhaps even suggested it, as it senses that the situation along the Taiwan Straits is spiraling out of control, but also a whole flurry of articles which have suddenly been appearing in the US and British media, all of which appear to recognise that the situation between China and the United States is indeed spiralling out of control, and that action needs to be taken, and taken urgently, in order to stabilise them. And we've had articles like one which has appeared in The Guardian, which is, of course, a British newspaper, but one which is widely read in the United States. And it comes with the title, it appeared on Tuesday, by the way, even as the Chinese were deploying more of their aircraft in and around Taiwan. It reads, it is entitled, "The US Must Avoid War with China Over Taiwan at All Costs," and it is written by a Lieutenant Colonel Daniel L. Davis, retired. And it says the prevailing mood amongst Washington insiders is to fight if China attempts to conquer Taiwan. That would be a mistake. And then he then goes on to say, bluntly put, the United States should refuse to be drawn into a no-win war with Beijing. It needs to be said up front, there will be no palatable choice if China finally made good on its decades-long threat to take Taiwan by force. Either choose a bad, bitter-tasting outcome or a self-destructing one in which our existence is put at risk. People in Washington are unaware of how little wartime capacity we actually have forward deployed in the Indo-Pacific, and seem unaware of how significant China's capacity is off its shores, but which we are in no way guaranteed to tamp down or defeat a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. As I have previously detailed, there is no rational scenario in which the United States could end up in a better, more secure place after a war with China. The best that could be hoped for would be a Pyrrhic victory in which we are saddled with becoming the permanent defense force for Taiwan, costing us hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and the equally permanent requirement to be ready for the inevitable Chinese counterattack. The most likely outcome would be a conventional defeat of our forces in which China ultimately succeeds despite our intervention at the cost of large numbers of our jets being shot down, ships being sunk, and thousands of our sea service personnel killed. But the worst case is a conventional war spiraling out of control and escalating into a nuclear exchange. That leaves as the best option something most Americans find unsatisfying, refusing to engage in direct combat against China on behalf of Taiwan. So, in other words, Lieutenant Colonel Davis says what is in fact obvious to all detached military observers, and what has been confirmed in various Pentagon war games, that in the event of a war between China and the United States over Taiwan, either China would win or there would be a nuclear exchange, which would be an absolute catastrophe for the United States. A Chinese victory in Taiwan would be a disaster for the United States. A nuclear exchange would be a catastrophe for the United States. So for that reason, the best policy for the United States is to avoid going to war with China over Taiwan. And we have been reading other things. We find similar articles starting to appear. For example, in Responsible Statecraft, the new Foreign Affairs magazine, operated by the Quincy Institute, the institute which has set itself up as the spokesman for realistic policy in the United States. And it says that US-China politics collide over Taiwan airspace. Growing conventional wisdom in Washington says that Beijing is preparing to attack the island, not so fast. And then the article goes on to say at great length that the Chinese are in fact reacting or responding, however provocatively to the American mind, to US Taiwanese statements and decisions, and that unfortunately neither side shows any signs of moving in a proper direction, and that the situation is becoming increasingly dangerous. And it basically also says that the need above all now is to try to recognize that the situation is now a slow motion train wreck, and that the United States needs to find some sort of balance between deterrence and political reassurance to China regarding Taiwan, and in fact the relationship in general, and that this requires a sustained and substantive dialogue. And significantly, in relation to the latest events, this article appears to have been rushed out shortly after the news of the meeting between Sullivan and Jiechi in Switzerland. It is in fact mentioned or referred to in this article. That meeting is referred to in this article. So we see articles, some articles at least, appearing in Western newspapers, British and American newspapers, saying that a war between the United States and China over Taiwan would be a disaster, that it would either end in a US military defeat, conventional military defeat, or it would result in a nuclear exchange, which would also be a disaster for the United States. And by the way, Lieutenant Colonel Davis's suggestion that there might just be conceivably some kind of American military victory over Taiwan, but one which would lock the United States into a massively expensive position of having to indefinitely defend the island. I think that even Lieutenant Colonel Davis has basically admitted that that option, bad as it is simply not a realistic one. Vastly more likely, if there is a war over Taiwan, the United States will be defeated over the course of it. And in fact, we have seen a further editorial from Global Times which reinforces this point. And it makes the following observation: there is no force in the world whose will to defend Taiwan is stronger than China's will to fight against secession and achieve reunification. To be precise, they are completely incompatible. China dares to have a life and death fight against any force that hinders our reunification, but no force dares or is willing to fight to the death against the world's second largest economy, as well as a nuclear power, in order to prevent China's reunification. Well, these are strong, even if you like, belligerent words from China, but I could suspect they contain a grain of truth. For China, the issue of Taiwan is an existential issue. It is one it is prepared to fight for, even at the price of taking enormous risks, and it is perhaps even prepared to embrace those risks, however enormous they might be. By contrast, the United States cannot afford a military defeat in the Pacific, and it certainly is not prepared to go all out and confront China in a nuclear war, one which would be devastating for the United States itself. Given that this is so, as Lieutenant Colonel Davis and responsible Statecraft both say, the only realistic option that the United States has is to try to come to some kind of terms over Taiwan and other matters with Beijing, with the Chinese saying, look, we're not asking you for a total capitulation, we're not seeking your friendship. All we are looking for is a stalemate, a geopolitical ceasefire, the very policy that I have been arguing for in various programs on this channel for months. The Chinese are prepared to go down that route if the United States is. The question is the United States prepared to go down that route? I think the straightforward answer is that some people in the United States are beginning to understand the enormous dangers that the United States is facing, the fact that ending up in a confrontation, a military confrontation with China over Taiwan is straightforward madness, but I don't think that they are necessarily the majority, and I'm not far from convinced that they're going to prevail. And here I'm going to come back to the recent trade talks, and we learn, this time again from responsible Statecraft, that in fact the speech by Catherine Tsai, the one that Global Times tried to put a positive spin on about trade, actually has ended up with the situation being left exactly as it was. And this is how responsible Statecraft reports on Catherine Tsai's speech. In a highly anticipated speech on Monday, the Biden administration's top trade official, Catherine Tsai, outlined a new policy on trade with China following a comprehensive month-long review. In fact, the biggest takeaway from the speech is that there is not really a new approach at all. Tariffs on roughly $250 billion worth of imports left in place by the Trump administration are here to stay, with no indication if or when they might be lifted. So, in other words, there's a commitment to a dialogue, but no real sign from the United States that it has the political will or intention to make concessions on trade. Now, I'm going to say straightforwardly that I think the issue of trade and the issue of Taiwan, the issue of trade and the political and strategic relationship between the United States and China, those two issues need to be separated. I think the United States is fully entitled to take whatever policies on trade it considers are in its own interests, always, of course, on the basis of whatever trade agreements and treaties it has reached with other countries. But trade is one matter where the United States is entitled, or perhaps can, push back against China on some issues without putting the peace of the world and its own existence in jeopardy. Other hot issues like Taiwan, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, and the rest are entirely different. Here, the United States needs to understand that whilst the Chinese might be prepared to accept some pushback on trade issues, might be prepared to make some concessions on trade issues. On the South China Sea, on the issue of Taiwan, on the East China Sea, they are not going to make any concessions at all. They will always insist that Taiwan is a part of China. They will always make clear that any moves by Taiwan to seek independence from China will meet with a military response. And the United States, if it wants to avoid an all-out military conflict with China over Taiwan, needs to acknowledge that fact and needs to make moves to accept and acknowledge China's position. The reason I bring up the topic of the trade talks is because, contrary to what Global Times is saying, going through Catherine Tsai's speech, I didn't get the impression of any real warmth or willingness to engage China in any sort of dialogue, even on trade at all. When we read from Catherine Tsai that it'll be a frank and open dialogue, that suggests yet again a position where the United States sees itself entitled, making demands of the other side and expecting that the other side will simply capitulate and accede to them. That, after all, is how the United States has been conducting relations around the world with most countries for most of the period since the end of the Second World War, and emphatically since the Cold War ended. If the same philosophy is brought to the military and strategic issues, Taiwan, the South China Sea, the East China Sea, indeed arms control, if the United States adopts the same approach in negotiating with China as we have seen it take in the trade talks as signalled by Catherine Tsai, then frankly things are not going to get better, they're going to get worse. We saw how the military talks, the talks between the Chinese and US militaries, which took place last week, ended up making the situation between China and the United States even worse, with the Chinese making strong statements about Taiwan and deploying fighter jets in ever-increasing numbers in and around Taiwan. And I'm afraid that if Jake Sullivan comes to Zurich and talks to the Chinese in similar sort of terms, then that will only mean that the situation between China and the United States will deteriorate even more. I said in my two previous programs that given how tense the situation has become, it would actually be better if the United States said nothing to China, conducted no dialogue of substance or indeed of any kind with China, but preserved a period of silence with its relations in its discussions with China, rather than talk to China in a way that will simply make what is already an escalating situation, the slow motion train wreck that responsible statecraft was talking about, only it's not slow motion, it's rapid motion, making that whole situation even worse. Well, we will see what Mr. Sullivan comes with to Zurich. I am very pessimistic about these discussions. I don't think that a consensus has yet been reached in the United States where the United States is prepared to take the necessary steps to achieve that geostrategic ceasefire with China that is the route out of this coming disaster. But as we have seen from the Chinese, that option of seeking that geostrategic ceasefire is there. I suspect that sooner or later, as the reality of the disaster the United States faces in the Taiwan Straits and in the South China Sea and in the East China Sea becomes clearer, more voices in the United States will start to be raised to suggest that. But I'm afraid we're not yet at that point now. Well, we shall see what happens, and obviously I will be following up on whatever happens in the talks between Yang Jiechi and Jake Sullivan in Zurich. And you'll be hearing more from me about that in the next few days. Last point I would make, which is that Mr. Sullivan has, to put it mildly, failed to distinguish himself as a national security advisor or diplomat in his dealings with the Russians and the Chinese up till now. This is going to be his big test. Let's hope he finds it in himself to succeed in it. Thank you for joining me in this program today. I look forward to you joining me in future programs on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend Alex Christoforou. You can also find us on our new platforms, Above All Locals, where we are increasingly publishing exclusive content. There's an exceptional program that we recently did, for example, with the American lawyer Robert Barnes. You can find the whole of that program on our Locals channel. We've only published excerpts on YouTube, and we've also had many members of our community also publishing content on Locals, and of course you can join them and participate in that as you wish. And I myself am increasingly publishing content which is exclusive to Locals also. But we're not only on Locals. You can find us on our other platforms, especially the new free speech platform SuperU. But we are also on BitChute, Library, Rumble, and Odyssey. And of course, if you want to support us, you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar. And you can also come to our shop and buy the amazing things that we have there. Our famous magic mugs, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, our t-shirts, and all the rest. Lastly, if you like this video, please remember to press the like button, and please also check your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me today. I look forward to you joining me again in future programs, and have a wonderful day until then.